So today I'm going to talk about 404, trying to explain why I use it. Before I explain 404, I probably need to explain a few basics leading up for people who don't know. I'll do this video in chapters, so you can skip ahead if you already know this, but I'll try and explain chain pitch, its relationship to gearing, what happens when we change sprockets. We'll probably have to talk about kerf, and then we can move on to the 404 stuff. If you want a short answer for the 404, you just want that. It's money, not cut speed. It's about money. So anyway, we'll just start with the basics. We'll work our way through it. Like I said, I'll put it in chapters so you can jump through if you already know the basic stuff. So to start off with the very basics, chain pitch is a length measurement. It is measured between the center of 3 rivets on each chain, and then that number is divided in 2. So you'd measure those from my thumb to my thumb, and then you divide that number by 2, and that is your chain pitch. For what we're going to talk about today, we're talking about chain pitches that are most commonly used on saws between 30 and 100 plus cc. So there's really only 3 sizes we need to know about. That is 0.325. The next one we'll call 3/8, but its measurement when you put it as a decimal is 0.375. And then we have the last one, which is 404. People will be talking about 3/8 low pro. For the point of just measuring pitch, it is exactly the same as 3/8 chain. It runs a lower profile cutter that is both lower in height, generally narrower. But its actual chain pitch size is 3/8 or 0.375 of an inch. So that's a measurement between any 3 lengths. Where things get interesting is the relationship of chain pitch to gearing. When we get increased chain pitch from 325 to say 375, we increase chain speed. Because all those links are further apart, it now drives the chain faster, which we'll touch on very soon. So that's really the first thing you need to know about chain pitch. So we'll touch on some of this very quickly. If I take 2 chains, we try and hold them up so you guys can see them. At the bottom we have a 404, at the top we have a 3/8. So what are the benefits between these apart from changing the gearing? It's mostly to do with the distance between the cutters. So if we line the cutters up, you can see how the 404 is further apart. If you're cutting a lot of small diameter stuff, it can be very beneficial to have these closer together. The idea of that is there's less space in between them for things to fall. It can make cutting a bit smoother, it can reduce vibrations. It generally is better for cutting small diameter stuff, which is helpful because 325 is normally run on smaller capacity saws. This gets a bit muddled once we're into that 3/8 low pro, because that's what is used predominantly on the very smallest of saws, the common ones sort of in that homeowner range. They get away with it because of the design of the chain. The cutters are very low in height. They're all generally safety chains. They're set up in a way that is very user-friendly for less experienced users. So that's really your biggest benefit of going down in that chain size, that chain pitch, is decreasing the distance between the cutters. So that's the very basics of chain pitch. Then we get into gearing. So the gearing is partially controlled by the distance in the links. So chain pitch, obviously as we go up, that gearing becomes higher. Then we can start manipulating things with rim sprockets. So that's a 3257, a 3258. We have a 3259, 387, 388, a 404, and a 404/8. As you can see, they get bigger in diameter. They do to increase in diameter to allow more slots. So obviously a 388 is bigger because it needs more surface area to cover that many drive pins. The easiest way for most people to think about this, if you've ever ridden a push bike with gears, a motorbike, driven a car, a truck, whatever, think of what happens as you go up the gears on any of them. The overall speed increases, but generally torque reduces. So if you're trying to go up a hill, you might come down a gear. Unless you're on the highway, you want like an overdrive, you want extra gear. So that gearing's at play with your saw. When we can distinguish between them by manipulating chain pitch and by manipulating the sprockets. I'll draw out some very basics of chain speed and I can show you what's occurring. Okay, here's some rough estimations of chain speed. These are displayed in feet per second. You can convert them to meters per second or whatever you require. There is a calculation for doing this. It's pretty basic. These are all done for the same figure of 10,000 RPM, just to be simple. The numbers aren't exact. I've rounded them down a bit, but it gives you a rough indication. So when we talk about chain speed or playing with different pitches, there's a few different things we can do. But as you can see, some of these numbers line up to a degree. So we've got our 325, our 38, and our 404. Now initially, say you made the swap from a 387 to a 404. You can see we've increased almost 10% difference in chain speed. So you'd expect to lose torque. 404 is a difficult one to go to. Honestly, there is no getting away from that because 404.7s, like this rim sprocket here, are the smallest they make. When we look at chain pitch and the gearing, I've put up a few examples recently. So I ran a MS170 running full size 325 chain. So the easiest way to understand how that's possible, an MS170 runs 3/8 chain. Admittedly it's low pro, but it's 3/8 chain. With a 6.2 sprocket, you're getting about 62.5 feet per second. When I've gone to a 325.7, we've only had a very marginal increase in chain speed. So the actual load effect from that isn't that great. You can see as you move through them, you can adjust things. So a lot of saws, say I have an MS110, generally they come with a 3/8 setup. So you'd be running a 3/8/7.2 sprocket at about 72.9 feet per second. I actually prefer the feel and the use of that saw running 325. So I generally run a 325 8 tooth. The reason I've increased from the 7 to the 8 is because I've reduced that gearing. You can see we're playing with roughly the same chain speed. If you're using a saw and you like that higher chain speed, you might be someone running a 3/8/8.2 sprocket. Changing to a 404.7 isn't really a change for you in the gearing, just due to the way it is. But you can manipulate all of this stuff around. So that's the interaction of chain pitch and the rim sprockets to create the actual chain speed, the gearing that we're running on the saw. You can play with all of these things. Some people prefer the feel of that very high chain speed. I've just realized I've done this whole thing with the meters per second conversion for the 9 tooth, the 3259 up there. In feet per second, it should be 81.3. So sorry about that, I've misled people. But it actually gives a good example, I guess. If you wanted to keep that sort of chain speed, you could run a 3259 or a 388. Okay, so now that we've fixed that, it will probably make a little more sense. There's some things that occur, some factors that occur during this that changes things. If you were to measure the amount of teeth passing by a fixed point, you'll potentially have more cutters engaging in the wood at any one time, driving the same chain speed but with a smaller chain pitch. This is part of it. Some people actually deliberately chase this because it's what they want. Overall, I haven't found it to make too much of a negative effect on things. So if we look at a 387 and a 3258, while we're getting pretty much the same chain speed, more cutters will pass at any certain point within, say, a second on the 325 chain because they're closer together. So you may get that trade-off if it might want a little bit more power because there could potentially be more cutters engaged, and it might change as you go up. It really depends on the saw, the wood you're cutting, and the technique that you're using, bar lengths and all of that. Given rim sprockets used to be extremely cheap. If you're running a saw that runs rims, you can still buy them for an okay price now. I've got to admit though, like some of the prices, especially the steel ones now, what they charge for one is what you used to buy a tube of 10 for. It is ridiculous what they're asking for these things these days. So like I said, that gives everyone a rough indication of pitch and the gearing. You can manipulate these around to try and match up what you want. And it's not possible to do this on all saws. Generally, the little bit bigger they are, the easier it gets, but in the little stuff, you can still do it to a degree. Next, we'll need to mention Kerf. So kerf is, if you look at a chain from the front, we've got a left and a right hand cutter. They will overlap in the middle, the top plates will. If we measure the distance from the very outside of both corners of that chain, that is our mechanical kerf. It is the width of the chain. Kerf width changes from when the cutters are new to when they're filed back and worn out. They have a side plate clearance angle. If you look at a cutter from the top, they lean outwards. So as we file them, they become shorter and they become narrower as well. They start tapering in. This is how saw chain gets its set. So when we're controlling the length of the cutter, we're not only controlling the height because they have that top plate clearance angle sliding back, we're also controlling the width because they have that side plate clearance angle. If you've ever heard it said that you should maintain cutters at the same length, that's why we're controlling the cutter's height and the cutter's width. Controversial opinion, but that's actually what occurs. Whether it makes a difference or not to you, none of my business. You bought it, it's your chain, do whatever you like with it. So that is our mechanical kerf. There is a second part of this which is called wood kerf, which is a gap it actually cuts in a log when we cut. There is many things that affect the width of this. It's not only that set mechanical kerf that we start with. Different filing angles, that top plate angle, the one you see when you look at a cutter from above, say 30 degrees or 25 or 35. As you increase that, it generally increases wood kerf because it allows the cutters to try and pull out slightly more into the walls of the kerf. Chain is not fixed as such, those rivets have movement and it can allow them to pull outwards more. So the harder they try and deviate away from each other, the wider the wood kerf will be. The reason I bring up kerf is generally it's regarded that as you increase chain pitch, you increase the kerf, the width of the chain. This is partially correct, but it gets very messy. If we look at 3/8 Low Pro, it is available in both small and long cutter versions, even within the same gauge. 3/8 Low Pro changes cutter size generally with gauge, and that's something that doesn't occur as much in the larger chains. So a 43 gauge 3/8 Low Pro is generally regarded as being narrower than a 50 gauge 3/8 Low Pro. This doesn't occur as much in the larger sizes, especially within some manufacturers. It's a confusing subject for another video. What is generally regarded is people believe a 325 is narrower in kerf than a 3/8, and they are all narrower than a 404. What has changed really over the last 5 to 10 years is 3/8 chains in general have become narrower. We look at some of the newer ones like an Oregon EXL, the Husky C8385s, Still Hexa. They've all decreased in mechanical kerf. If we compare them to sort of equivalent of 3/8 chains, you'll find that the kerf is pretty much the same. Cutter length, cutter width, side plate width, top plate width are generally the same now. It really depends on the chain you're using, but between a 325 and a 3/8, they are very similar. What does change between them is the clearance between the lower part of the top plate and the top of the drive link. 3/8 chains are generally taller in that area. That can be a benefit, especially to guys cutting softwoods. You guys get bigger, longer chips, the chip needs to escape down under there. That increased height can be beneficial. Not saying that a 3/8 chain in general will cut better than a 325, but it is a possibility in some situations. In general, I find most 3/8 chains and 325 chains, these are full chisels, will be around 6.6 to 6.7 millimeters. Older style ones, so you can still buy Oregon like CJ, which is their square file chains. Still RS is similar to this too. They'll average somewhere around 7 to 7.2 millimeters. So there is an increase. These are generally wider than 325 chains. However, like I said, the newer stuff, if you're running EXL, the Husky chains, things like that, still Hexa, it can be very similar in width to 325s. 404s are generally wider. Generally, they'll sit in that 7.3 to about 7.5. If we compare their mechanical kerf to a 325 or some of these modern 3/8 chains, yes, there is an increase in kerf and it can be significant. Sort of that 10 to 15% range. I will counter the point that this makes. I have run 325 narrow kerfs, the closest to comparisons I could get with both Husky chains, a specially made narrow kerf called an SP33G, and their regular full kerf one. There was approximately a 13% difference in chain kerf, mechanical kerf. For that 13% reduction, I only found approximately 4% difference in cut speed on a 45cc saw with a 16-inch bar. This generally has been holding pretty true for me. The difference in cut speed by reducing the kerf isn't equal to the amount of reduction. The reason for this is the hardest job a chain does is actually the side plate out here severing the wood fibers. So fibers, when you look at them, so wood when you look at it is made up of a bunch of little fibers. Severing all of these with the side plate here is the most power intensive job. The overall width of the top plates, their job is much easier and it doesn't seem to have as much of an effect. So like I said, approximately 13% reduction in kerf width, was only seeing a very small increase in chain speed. So yes, 404 does have a wider mechanical kerf and more than likely a wider wood kerf depending on how you set it up. It will be wider, it may require more power from that point of view. Whether it does or not is purely dependent on what you're doing. You can control the amount of power that's required by a chain, so we can generally sort of overcome this, but that's the basics of kerf. Now we can actually get into the chain itself. So 404. I put up a video the other day of me running a Dolmar 7900 with this 24-inch Windsor speed tip bar and some still 46 RS, which is their full chisel 404. The reason I did that video as an example is because that is the first saw and combination that I ever encountered 404 chain on. At the time, the 7900 was the biggest saw that I owned. I was cutting a lot of dirty crap while trying to clear stuff out of the way. We wanted it for firewood, but a lot of it had been pushed into a heap. A lot of it had some dirt and crap in the middle. It was dulling chains. I was running 3/8 semi chisel at the time. They didn't last very long. I was having no end of problems. So I went and spoke to a dealer that I knew who had an incredible amount of knowledge. And I said to him, what do I need to do? He gave me two options. He could sell me still RD3, which is their carbide chain. I had no way of sharpening at the time. I didn't have a grinder. I didn't own a diamond wheel. With the way I was using chain at the time, it would have required sharpening once a day. Carbide chain does stay sharper longer, but it's not like it lasts forever. Generally about 5 times longer than normal chain. The sheer cost of the carbide chains at the time made it not really a viable option. Option 2 he gave me was basically said, why don't you just do what everyone else does and run 404? All of my information at that time had come off internet forums because I didn't know any better. I knew that 404 just wouldn't work. It's the information that's out there. It's only for big saws. It wouldn't work. He told me it works for everyone else. I trust him, so I took his advice. For less than the price of a carbide chain at the time, I was able to get that bar and a loop of Oregon semi-chisel 404. Exactly like this. Oregon 27X 404 semi. He told me that it probably wouldn't work straight off the roll and told me how to sharpen it to suit the saw. I took that and I cut a hell of a lot of wood. I'll throw up a picture here. This is me running that saw, that bar, about 2016. I'd owned it for a couple of years at this stage. I cut a lot of wood with that combination. Things progressed from there. I bought an even larger saw. I bought an MS880. Obviously, by that stage, you're buying chain like this because I'm using it a lot. So, buying rolls of chain. It runs 404 because it's a big saw. So, hell, why not make everything else run it too? So the benefit of 404 comes from these cutters. When you measure it compared to a 3/8 chain, it has a thicker side plate and a thicker top plate. All that meets in a larger, thicker corner. In general, 404 chain will tolerate much more before it dulls than a 3/8 chain. Because of that, you sharpen it less frequently. When we look at it from above, you guys might be able to make out the cutters are very long. When you buy it, you get a lot more cutter tooth. You get a thicker side plate, a thicker top plate, a more robust corner. Because of this, you sharpen it less frequently. When you do sharpen it, you need to remove less. You can sharpen it more times before you run out of cutter. It's a cost-based thing. It is much more cost effective to be able to run this stuff if you can. There are downsides to it. Generally, 404 chains have never really received updates. So while this does have a rounded front on the depth gauge, not all of them do. They never really got any of the comfort features. None of them have heel clearance on the cutters. They'll be rougher to use. There's generally no safety features in this. Manufacturers don't recommend it for the most part, purely because they're trying to recommend chains that anyone can run. They need to recommend stuff that's safe. That's why you see a lot of recommendations from manufacturers in manuals or anything like that, recommending you run the green chains with a kickback rating. There is no 404 chain with a kickback rating. Availability really seems to depend on where you're based in the world. So to keep it simple, I'm in Australia. Here it is very common. To give you an idea of how common, I rang 9 different dealers around me just at random. Out of the 9, 4 were stall dealers, 3 were husky dealers, 2 were independent shops, just smaller shops. Out of the 9, 8 had both full and semi-chisel 404 available straight away. The 9th one only had 404 semi. Out of those 9, 2 had 3/8 skip chain available. One had a 36 RSLF, which is a still skip square, and one had an Oregon EXJ, which is a skip version of EXL. In terms of actual popularity, where I'm based, it is very much 404. It's much more available. When you buy it in a roll, you get less links per roll, but you also use less links to make a chain loop. So if we take 25-inch bars, for example, it's 84 drive links of 3/8 or it's 77 drive links of 404. The cost works out about the same. When I rang most of these dealers, I just sort of got pricing. For the most part, they charge by bar length. 25-inch chain is a 25-inch chain to them. They don't really care. You pay the same price. Some places tend to charge a little more for 404, but it really depends. So where I am, availability is very good. It's very common. So it makes a lot of sense to use it. It's not really about cut speed. If you can set it up correctly to suit the saw and the task that you're doing, you are going to have more chain speed, but you will have less cutters in the wood. You may increase cut speed slightly, but for the most part, I don't think it does. I've never actually tested it. I do run hard-nosed bars, which I theoretically could run a 3/8 and a 404 on, but I've never actually tested it. It might be something I do at some stage, but I need 2 chains that are comparable, and I've never actually had that at any point. It's unlikely that it will cut faster with 404, in my opinion, but I don't know. So yeah, the reason for 404 for me was never about that cut speed. It was about money. It's much easier to save $1 than it is to make $1 running a saw, and this is just more cost effective. So essentially that's the basics of 404. It's just a more cost effective way of cutting if you have a saw that is capable of pulling it. Given most of the actual cutting I do these days has continued to be with larger saws, I've been able to get away with it. So I'll continue to do it with all the bigger stuff. It's difficult to give a size cutoff. Things like a Still 08S, which can be between 48 and 56 cc's, they can pull it. Lots of old 50cc saws could. They were running it to try and increase chain speed because they just didn't have much actual engine speed. I have used it on a 461. It works. I've used a lot of it on the Dolmar 7900, which is 78.5 cc's, about 6 horsepower. A 288 clone runs it. I run it pretty much exclusively on a 660 without a drama in the world. As far as all the stuff like the load on the saw, that can be controlled by you. The way you sharpen it, the way you set it all up. I will try and do another video. I may even go and purchase a new loop of something more commonly used, like a 46RS or something. Just to show you the process of making it work on a saw that is smaller. Even on a 120cc saw, the factory grind for Australian hardwood can only be described as shit. It is a miserable experience trying to cut with it. You need to adjust it to make it suitable for the task that we're doing here. I have no idea how it performs in softwoods because it's just not something I do. It may be perfect for guys cutting softer woods, no idea at all. So yeah, I'll try and go through some of the setup in a later video. It's just a matter of changing a few angles to suit the application and then adjusting depth gauges to suit what you've got from there. Everyone's slightly different, but I can just show you what I do. Some people will be critical of that, needing to adjust it to suit. Say you're wasting chain because you're sharpening it before you're using it or whatever. I gotta be honest, I sharpen the majority of chains before I use them because I don't think I've ever found a factory grind that's just straight out worked for me. Everyone's different, but for the most part, they're all shit. So yeah, that's just some basic information there about chain pitch, the rim sprockets, chain speeds, and why I've run quite a lot of 404 and I have zero intention of stopping. It is just too cost effective for the most part. Everyone's different. Everyone will have different feelings about it. There are drawbacks to it. There's downsides. Like I said, you're going to get very little in the way of vibration control or safety or anything like that. It's not something that new people should go and run. It can tend to be a little trickier to run the saw. Take some practice. But yeah. Anyway, that's enough for today.